All right, good evening, Star. This is our collab. We're going to be talking about design and science. Before we do that, we got a couple of announcements. If you want membership, it's going to be $6 for this semester. That can give you discounts on t-shirts, keychains. You can vote in the upcoming election, which is going to be very soon. If you want that, you can talk to Tulio. Another thing that you can also get from talking to Tulio is one of our delightful sodas. They're $1 a piece, and all money goes to the IDPF, the International Bipolar Foundation, in memory of Carrie Fisher. Another thing that's going on this week is our annual night crew. If our captain would like to come up and talk about that.
I would love to. Thank you, John. So night crew is something that STAR does every year, and this year we are doing it in order to try and get people who are interested in having our jobs next year. We're trying to get them some more hands-on information about what we do, because we have 5 members of our bridge crew, which is our e-board, and we all do different stuff. Claire is our chief engineer. She is in charge of all of our physical assets, as well as our online stuff like the website, making sure that that is running correctly. We also have John, who is our comms officer. He's in charge of communicating directly with you lovely people. He also writes the emails, the Facebook posts, a lot of the Slack posts that you see. A lot of the stuff that is STAR talking to you online, that's John. He's writing that. We also have an ops officer. That is Tulio. The ops officer is like the treasurer. He handles all of the money and working very closely with the club's office, making sure that we're doing things correctly so that we don't get shut down. That's bad. And we have Cameron, who's the first officer. The first officer is like the vice president of the club. Some of the first officer's duties include making the room reservations for either the following year or that year for all of our committees. The first officer is also the automatic head of every committee at the start of the year or whenever they form, and then elections are held, and the first officer either gives that position to someone else after the election, or the first officer retains that position because they win an election. And then there's the captain, and that is me. The captain is like the president of the club. I am in charge. I am in charge.
She's in charge.
Yes. If you are interested in any of these positions, this week we are going to be having a meeting on Thursday to talk about like how we run stuff in depth. That could be really helpful. But if you want to be on night crew, please talk to one of any of the bridge crew members. Even if it's not the position you're looking for, we can point you in the right direction. We would love to have you involved. We need you for the future of our club. Elections are coming up, guys. Thank you.
So Ava also brought up that there's going to be a special presentation this Thursday about how STAR runs the club. And Zach is going to be giving that. Would you like to give a little?
Sure. So I'm kind of in the middle, which really face everyone. But this Thursday, I'm going to be running a thing that we are calling STAR Presents How We Club, which is basically an overview of what goes into making a mission like this one or any mission happen, what goes on behind the scenes, what sort of tech setup we use to keep track of everything so things don't fall through the cracks, and how our PR machine makes it so our posters advertising the event get up on all the walls, and our digital advertising gets out to everyone's inboxes and Facebooks and all that. So if you're interested in whether you're interested in serving on the bridge crew in the future, or you're interested in starting a club, or you're interested in potentially learning how STAR does some things that you might want to apply to another club, I hope you will come by on Thursday and talk about club stuff.
And then that leads us into our next event, which is going to be next Tuesday, April 2nd. It's going to be a Jeopardy night. So if you guys like sci-fi trivia, you can test your knowledge against all of your friends. can sign up, not tonight, but we will have sign-ups available soon and definitely in next week's mission. It'll be $5 per person. You can also join in teams of 2 or 3. That's going to be 6 o'clock in the bamboo room on next Tuesday.
Can I win anything?
Yeah, you can win prizes. Like, what kind of prizes can you win, Cameron?
Fun mystery prizes.
No, it's not a mystery.
It's a mystery because it's not on the announcement.
Okay, you can win a gift card to Regal Henrietta. So keep that in mind before you buy your Infinity War ticket, because you could win, like, I think they were $10. Yeah, $10 for Regal Henrietta, which is a ticket. It's pretty rad, because if you don't see Infinity War, that's okay. You can just do whatever you want.
And then the last couple things are going to be stuff that's happening outside of STAR. Anime Club has a social night this Saturday at 6:30 in the bamboo room. It's going to be like one of our STAR social nights we've had this semester and last semester, but with anime nerds instead of sci-fi nerds. So you should go check that out. And Anime Club is also hosting Toricon not on the 14th and 15th of April. STAR is going to be there running Artemis. So come by, check that out. What's up?
I'll also be giving a medal.
Oh,
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I think it's like 11 o'clock.
Oh.
And it's about a mildly sci-fi show. Yeah, you should totally come check it out if you're around.
Yeah, definitely. So go check that out too. Without further ado, let's hand it off to Cameron and our friends in STARITGraph for their wonderful mission.
Hi everyone, my name is Julia. I'm Vice President of STARITGraph, and we have technical difficulties.
Wow.
Wow. Today we're going to be talking about the digital design of science fiction, and also how good that fun is.
It's loading still.
We can't present
Wi-Fi here.
now.
No, the black one.
Oh, hang on. Live.
We can make it available offline to do that. Gosh. Never mind.
One day we'll be ready. In the meantime, what is STARITGraph?
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you for asking. Hi. STARITGraph is RIT's local chapter of SIGGRAPH, which is International Computer Graphics Convention. We're kind of formed out of the 3D digital major, so what we do is we teach software workshops, we have contests, and we have monthly critiques. So we work in software that, so today we're going to be talking about, well, first I'm going to introduce you to where I'm from, then we're going to talk about design in context, and the design process between Star Wars, the original trilogy, Halo 1, and Black Panther. Well, Halo in general, and then Black Panther. Then we're going to have a discussion. Nice. Okay, so I am from STARITGraph. We are, you know what I am now. We deal a lot with 3D graphics and art design. So we have student-led workshops in software like Maya, ZBrush, Unity, Unreal Engine, stuff like that. We're made out of 3D artists, game designers, programmers, etc. And here's some of the stuff that we've done. We just had a design competition last week where our prize was a community scanner that one of our professors donated. We had a texturing contest where our winner was this anime cute little girl down. One of our alumni who actually has a job in life, actually has a job, made us this beautiful masterpiece as president.
Oh dear.
So
That happened.
yeah, he can get a quick no. So we're just a community of 3D enthusiasts.
Well, it sounds like that has a pretty high barrier to entry.
Oh, why would you ask that? We love intermajor collaboration, so we always love to meet people who are like a game designer or film or anybody who could make use of a 3D artist or a designer. We have people who specialize in 2D stuff, 3D stuff, what have you. So if you're ever working on a cool project and you want to meet people who can make it look visually aesthetic, mostly, you might meet them at STARITGraph. So today we're going to be talking about what makes good design and how that applies to science fiction. Because when you really think about it, the best science fiction works, I'm sure the ones you love, always have some really good design to them, or something that makes them appeal and stand out to you. And so how we're going to summarize it is that good design is honest, it's clear, and it's informed. And we're going to show you in our examples how that manifests. So what is it about sci-fi that makes sci-fi?
So, I mean, there's a couple of regular elements that sort of exist across the culture, lens flares notwithstanding. But like sorts of things that just feel future, right? There's a lot of lots of metals are used a lot. There's a lot of really interesting like complex designs and patterns on things. You know, something we call the Apple Store aesthetic, where it just even when it's dirty, it looks like it's still kind of clean, right? Even like the rusty metal is still a sheet of metal as opposed to like a dirt hovel or something like that.
And like it's not like this is a bad thing. I mean, cliches are cliches, but sometimes these tropes are kind of like a foundation to work on. So you see something, you're like, okay, that's science fiction. And the thing that makes it really stand out is how the creator chooses to go with it. Of course, there are many, you know, recurring things such as there's always some friggin' hexagonal pattern in literally everything. Or, yeah, when we talk about something that on our end, like as 3D artists, we joke about is like the sci-fi corridor. Like anytime a sci-fi environment artist makes a piece, it's always a sci-fi corridor. And as you can see, they can never just make like a rectangular hallway. It's always gonna have some weird hexagon shape or something coming in. Like what the hell is this? You can't tell me. No one knows. And there's bright, pretty lights, and there's crates around. But I mean, it works. And if you could show some proficiency.
But it looks sci-fi, right? All of those hallways, they're just like, yeah, that's sci-fi. Yeah, that's sci-fi. There was a lot of different pitches and colors and lights and textures and materials, but it was all like, yeah, that's a sci-fi hallway.
And you know that tile is hexagon shape. Know it. Yes.
As I understand it from my experience with sci-fi games, the reason there are crates and stuff around is because in the future, everyone feels like crouching behind chest-high walls.
And all the crates have lights on them too, because you can't have a.
So you can see them in the dark, so you can heal. So you don't trip on them,
So
and
you
then
can
need
see
to
through a
heal.
fog that's somewhere in your spaceship.
Matters they use in the future to keep all those crates lit.
No, they have wireless power.
Especially in like dystopian or like broken spaceships and horror games where like everything's broken, the lights are all off, but you can still see the crate in the dark.
Thank goodness.
It's just an aesthetic choice.
You could trip.
You could trip. That's true. But no one cares what's in them. But I think the thing that like still makes these franchises work is that every good successful franchise always has something that like sets it apart. And there's a lot of different questions you could ask yourself about the things you love. It might be something you want to reflect on later. You know, maybe it's the uniqueness of the story, or it takes a trope and it turns it on its head. And we're going to talk about Black Panther later, and you have this like strong hero who's king and he's regal, but then he realizes at the end that there's things that even he doesn't understand. You know, it emotionally resonates. You know, in terms of games, we talk later about Halo and how some of the visual cues make it easier for you to understand. All right, this enemy is tough, but this enemy is tougher because he's massive. He has spikes on him. You know, and even when you have stories set hundreds, thousands of years in the future, where the technology is so amazing, it's pretty much magic. As long as there's something that you can resonate with, you know that the designers made a strong, successful.
Yeah, these archetypes and whatnot exist for a reason. There's something intuitive about a lot of the design choices that, and anytime that, you know, we've all seen a sci-fi movie that spends its first 30 minutes explaining the world to you, and you're just like, okay, but like, where is the plot? These archetypes sort of provide designers with a shortcut and a quick bridge, right? If you see a huge guy with spikes and a red face who's standing over you and growling, you're like, oh, hey, look, it's a bad guy. You don't need to, particularly if it's an unimportant bad guy, you don't need to then go into a huge history about, you know, why his motivations are evil and, you know, why he wants to, you know, kill the protagonist. It's just like, ah, yes, he's big, spiky red, and he looks scary. That's a bad guy. And it just helps streamline a lot of stories because sci-fi can get kind of complicated.
So do any of these reasons explain why there aren't any railings in sci-fi?
It looks cool. Like, how are you as a Jedi gonna kick someone down a 1,000,000-foot drop? There's really simple.
Kick them through the railing.
Like, that is maybe something. So anyway, speaking of which, we're gonna talk about Anakin Starkiller in the Basic Space Force. As you can see, the famous cast of Friends.
Okay, hold on. I gotta go back. How did that happen? I just tapped my arm. My finger was not on the.
You're becoming one of the
I told you,
No,
like,
you can
it's
scroll.
gonna be this way.
You can scroll. Oh, you scroll through the slides. Wow. You learn something new every day, kids.
This is why we got the clicker.
This is why we have the quick clap. Okay. So yes, this was one of the first iterations of what we all know and love as Star Wars, and then we later knew and loved as Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. You can see a significant lack of Han Solo. Chewbacca is not at all lovable or cuddly. He's frankly terrifying. C-3PO looks like he's fresh out of Tomorrowland at Disney World, and R2-D2 has one too many arms.
Wait, is this actually a concept art?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
This is
damn.
by Rob McQuarrie, who worked on Star Wars since the very beginning. And through his art, you could see like the evolution, but originally Luke Skywalker, or Anakin Starkiller, was like this gruff, like war veteran who didn't have patience for other people.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
There's actually a comic book called The Star
Yes,
Wars,
there is.
which is George Lucas's original story for Star Wars with Ralph McQuarrie concept art, and it's really expensive.
How expensive? No,
It's like $70. Otherwise, I would have bought it already.
But yeah, I mean, you can see here that like this is one of the first iterations of like Luke Skywalker. He's got like this scary gas mask sort of thing. He's got this like really aggressive posture. You can see. I mean, also Darth Vader has the blue lightsaber, and he's got this much more like slim, skeletal, almost bug-like form to him. And it's just, you know, it just shows that it's indicative of a lot of times we think that this is also Star Wars concept art. So I mean, like a lot of times we think like these things that we know and love so much. It's like, ah, yes, the person who made this is like they got to be a genius, right? Like they just got it right on the first time, and they pitched the great movie to the execs, and the execs were like, yes, here's a lot of money, make the movie that you just thought up of last night. And like it's important to see that that's not always the case.
No, concept work and visual development is a huge, extensive process. And it takes a lot of time and hard work and a lot of people bouncing ideas off each other and working through these ideas. Like, I don't know what the hell this is supposed to be. I feel like this later becomes the Ewok village. When you see
Who
little
is
houses.
this? Who is this?
That was maybe that's the original. Before it was like a giant troll instead of a robot.
But through this original art, you can see this story starting to find itself. And this was like, you can like realize that this is like one of the concepts for the final confrontation between Luke and Darth Vader and the Emperor. But they're still trying to figure out like what kind of aesthetic they're going for, what's kind of gonna set the final tone of it. And I think, just
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
really cool.
You can see like a lot of elements that did stick forward, right? Like the
That's
throne and the especially the lights cast on Emperor Palpatine from the screen. Yeah. Like they were probably like, he's gonna get thrown in the lava, right? Classic. But I mean, like it's cool even like the juxtaposition, right? Because he's on this big like cool blue throne on this huge red room, and the aesthetic of the Death Star ended up taking from this throne most likely.
We just talk about the fact that is the only part of the room that's lit, like with artificial lighting. Because like, no, that's not good enough. I need to see blue.
Surrounded by. How are they not on fire?
Space magic.
It's space magic. Oh, I didn't fix that slide. That's okay.
Okay, you know what? It's indicative of the possibilities in the future.
Exactly.
So Star Wars actually comes from a really old, like pulp science fiction known as a Sordid Planet, which basically some of the popular ones are Princess of Mars or Dune, where it basically comes down to some dude who is like not from this area gets caught up in things happening on another planet where for some reason they use swords. Like they have a bunch of future technology like shields and laser guns and all this, but for reasons explained in the plot, people still use swords. And part of the tropes and whatnot is, you know, the exploration of this new like planet and world and galaxy and why they freaking use swords for some reason. And like the characters and the culture around that.
Romeo plus Juliet?
Bring the longsword, huh?
But, like, you can see that in some of the old concept work too.
Yeah.
It's like all the stormtroopers have like swords and shields for whatever reason. They could have guns in the future, but they don't. And like you can even feel that like up until like at some point in the development it switched. Like all the evil guys have blue, like the Emperor had that blue light on him, and Darth Vader has the blue sword, etc. But like we're still not at the point where Star Wars is Star Wars, especially because right now it just sort of feels like Knights, but with space. So it's all part of how it needed to be developed and reworked, which is not just, you know, taking some of the inspirations. We're going to talk about the inspirations for Darth Vader on the next slide, but like it's not just taking these inspirations and then copying them. It needed to really be worked through and re-explored in order to create something new. So we have like this kind of cool look from propaganda and this samurai aesthetic that you sort of see echoed, at least like the striations on his gloves and sort of his shoulders.
Helmet shape a lot too.
Yeah, in how his final design is, and there's kind of inspiration from a film called The Fighting Devil Dogs, which have this villain in black. His troops are all in white. He has this kind of triangular ship called the Wing. Like there's similarities to different franchises, but it's how all these things come together. I think Star Wars.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that, you know, a lot of people like will say like, oh, this is like some new science fiction thing that's out. It's just Star Wars. Like, look at all this stuff that's just from Star Wars. Even Star Wars pulled from a lot of other things. And it just goes to show that nothing is original, right? Like, inspiration strikes people in really interesting ways, and they sort of manifest that. And it's really difficult not to be a fan of something. It's difficult not to just really love something that exists out there. And when you're a creator and you want to create something, you kind of want to pay homage to the things that you love. And apparently George Lucas loves those samurai.
There was this Japanese film that came out a few years before Star Wars 2 that had some like pretty similar shots. So like there was like a moon falling and then a star, the sun coming up at the same time, and then you see that same kind of shot in the Star Wars movies. Like, you can look at something really famous and be like, God, how did they create that? But if you were there at the time and you saw other films coming around at the time, you could be able to trace it. It's just these older franchises that feel so elusive sometimes. But some artists say that the best art is made by stealing. I don't condone plagiarism, but taking inspiration is healthy. And you'll see, like, when you study artists and then you see what inspired them, you can then begin to see, you know, how history can shape them. And how their ex-wives can shape the work. Because, oh my God, if Marcia Lucas were not around the creation of Star Wars, it would not have been a quarter of what it is. Which I think brings into one of the principles I was talking about of design, which is honesty. And being honest with yourself and honest with the people around you. Yes.
Like we saw what Star Wars happened without Marcia Lucas. It was the prequels. So it's like
exactly. Hold that comment. It's just when sometimes you make your really cool Star Knight space franchise and you're like, damn, this is the coolest shit ever. And it's really precious and it's your baby, and it's definitely not a ripoff of Japanese movies. And then you show it to someone and they're like, I don't like it. And you have the tendency to recoil and go, well, you just don't understand my art or whatever. But one thing that designers will stress to you, and actually we had a critique meeting at our STARITGraph just on how to give feedback and how to receive it. You have to, A, be willing to kill your darlings, and 2, be willing to put aside your ego, because criticism from good designers for good designers is crucial. You want to connect with your audience at any chance possible, and sometimes you need to put aside your own self-esteem to really make sure that what you're doing is hitting at the heart of what you're trying to express. A failure to accept criticism can just cause your artwork to suffer. Speaking of which, speaking. No,
Oh, no.
no.
What have I done? What have I done? Oh, no.
No, it's such a
going
good
the wrong
slide.
way.
I'm so
Go.
mad.
Why is it going
Go
forward?
back. You're going. You're
I'm
fucking
going
forward.
back.
Damn it, just stop. Just stop. Just stop.
No, I wasn't. I scrolled both ways and it went forward.
Here's what you tried. Here's what you did.
Now it's going.
I'm not touching it.
That's the point. Input lags.
Oh shit. Damn. I love art.
Oh, yeah.
Cassie, you're my Steve.
Well, if there was only one mishap,
Oh,
because I mean, there's not many-
actually-
more mishaps.
I'm like, okay, we
Cassie,
were.
do you want to mind the?
Can you be the?
Just edit it out.
Speaking of which, this is Cassie. She's president of RITGraph. She's a wonderful person. She's
Okay, so, want to try the last minute again?
yeah. Get ready for this. So so like I was saying, like Jar Jar is the key to all of this. So when your ego goes unchecked, when you don't think about your target audience and how a movie at like almost 2 decades after the originals, how what they're expecting, what they loved about your original story, if you don't really take into account rather, you know, the audience you're trying to connect with, you end up with really long scenes of CGI hairs just floating across the dinner table, and it's anguish, agony.
And 20-minute pod racing scene.
Yeah, that nobody wanted.
That was the best part of that.
When you have your marketing executive, you're trying to send the person that criticizes your work, and also when you stop, and when you have ideas that have free movie art, and like place them in their movies.
It's so the pod racing is essentially just a CGI tech demo, right? Like that he sold to like tech companies. Like, hey, you
Look, special effects.
look.
See, that's a thing that
Imagine if
happens.
you made an N64 game out of it.
It's sort of an issue that happens is that, you know, and this will happen in video games too, is that we have this amazing technology. We have this awesome, cool technology. Let's just put it everywhere. And that's actually on the next slide is when you start to over design. Or you just using your platform as a way to push cool ideas instead of actually designing. So yes, we could have a billion cool costume changes for Padme Amidala, but what did they contribute to the plot? Look, I know she looks great all the time and she's yes, queen, fashion icon, but I just can't remember anything that happened in those movies.
There's always a bigger fish.
There's always a big you'll find it in games. It's like the graphics are great. The PlayStation 4 can now handle so much stuff, but the gameplay suffers because the team spent so much time trying to make it pretty. That sort of thing.
Yeah,
Is when
design,
you can over.
yeah, design extends beyond just visual, right? Design extends beyond just technology that's happening. You also need to consider why it's there. Like purposeful placement of good design, or purposeful placement of like okay looking things designed well is going to be received better than poor placement of really gorgeous things that ultimately are meaningless.
Like,
Oh, well, I actually think that the prequels do that really well, where they do a good job of transitioning technology from 20 years before A New Hope to A New Hope. Not episode 1, but 2 and 3. Because you see earlier iterations of things you see in episodes 4, 5, and 6. And I think they do that really well.
It's like poetry. They rhyme.
Yes.
Star
The Venator class Star Destroyer is 2 triangles, and the Imperial Star Destroyer is 1 triangle.
Wow.
I think seeing the progression of the universe over the movies is definitely something that, like, when you have, oh god, I guess we're going on 9 movies, it's really interesting to see how the universe expands and changes. But sometimes, at least from the perspective of watching a movie, they can spend too much time going into little details, and that might be why sometimes the prequels feel unfocused.
Yeah, and so speaking of like over designing and over detailing things, we actually have a great example of how the different aspects of Star Wars handle something that's universal to all of them, and that is the Force. Where in the prequels you see, well, no, leave it here. In the prequels we see, you know, like Jedi, 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 Jedi! Like, oh man, and they're all flipping all over the place, and they're throwing 50 battle droids across the field, and then they're like blocking behind their back, and they're just like, the Force just is this, it almost falls into the background of, it becomes less important because of how ubiquitous it is. And every, and if you want to advance, in the original trilogy and whatnot, anytime that you see the Force, it's a really big deal. You know, when you see Luke Skywalker, right, like reaching for his lightsaber, you know, when he's hanging upside down in the Wampa cave, you know, you can see him straining, and the lightsaber shakes slightly, and it starts playing his theme song, and then it jumps into his hand, and he cuts himself down, and you know, and then it turns into an action sequence. But like, it feels more real, right? It's sort of like when you're doing a magic trick. If you're a big magician, if you do something absolutely crazy and wild and just like effortlessly do crazy things, people are like, oh, that's fake. But if you concentrate really hard and make something small happen, people go, whoa. And you know, watching the original trilogy, who sat on the couch and like had the remote be on the other side of the couch and been like, maybe, just maybe I can do it. And you concentrate and you try and you think maybe it'll twitch and move. But who has stood at the base of a building and go, you know, maybe I can triple backflip up all the way up the building. It feels less connected because it's more out there.
Yeah, and the Force kind of, in the original trilogies, was kind of used to as an extension of the characters themselves. So when you see Luke really straining to pull that lightsaber out of the ice, it's kind of an extension of his will to do it. And you see everything he tries to do and how much harder he tries than other people who wouldn't dare strike back against the Empire. His ability to use the Force is partly because he was born into it, but also because of how hard he tries, how much he cares. And that's what makes him powerful as a character. So it serves as an extension of the character's wills and intentions, and can be used thematically to show the emotional push and pull between different characters. When you see him like fighting against Darth Vader, it's because there's a clash between father and son. You get the feeling that it works in a literal way and in a metaphorical way.
Yeah. But once you turn it into a stat block that you can measure with a Force
who's
PDA,
more powerful than whom.
Yeah.
And it loses its kind of mystical ability because now it's a thing we can quantify, which takes away the suspense of, you know, will he defeat his father, or is it, oh, his father has 27,000 midichlorians, he's got 15,000, so of course Darth Vader would win, which doesn't explain why Luke won.
It's almost the opposite of what Dragon Ball Z did, where early on in Dragon Ball Z, they actually had quantifiable power levels, but then once they all got super powerful, like I can destroy a planet with my finger, they did away with that. So like you don't have, there's a numbers game anymore. It's like more about the characters striving to be better than the person they're fighting.
And it's less predictable.
It is, yeah. Like
it's more about what the characters do and less about what number they achieve.
Yeah. I think part of that has to comes down to George Lucas when he was doing the prequels. When he has like the League of Jedi, the Jedi Order, there is a sort of need to have the Force be like a tool rather than like a all-permeating like entity. Yeah. So in a way, he's changing the soft magic system that the Force is and turning it into a hard magic system, which
yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, Star Wars is basically just space wizards. Not wrong with that. Hmm? So going back to like, and actually the sequel trilogy really tries very hard to bring that mysticism back, right? You have Luke Skywalker and the sacred texts, right? It's kind of difficult to see here on the screen, but you can still like, these books are ancient, they're weathered, they're old, the pages have been rifled through so many times. And one of the really important things is that they never open the books because what's inside them doesn't matter ultimately. It's the fact that they exist, that there is implied to be not numbers and, okay, so if you cross your legs for 3 hours and then point up at the sky, it's more like a meditative sort of thing to it. And like, it brings back the sort of, like, I don't want to say religious aspects to it, but the mystical of like, you know, it's not about your number, it's about your connection to the Force. It's about your will.
So it's not, it kind of goes back to the more simplicity of the original trilogy, where you have him. It's not about whether or not he reads every page of this book, and it's not about whether Rey reads them. He burns them symbolically to let go of his past, and then they burn them. It's a mutual. It's whatever. And then Rey's connection with the Force also serves to develop her character. Instead of it being, how do I become more powerful than Kylo Ren? You have this rhyme between her reaching out and trying to understand Kylo Ren, and then Luke trying to understand his father. And you get to follow her journey to learn the Force and her journey to understand where she came from at the same time. So they deliberately make these choices in tying her emotional struggle with her tutorship under Luke Skywalker, so they can kind of kill two birds with one. And then we want to touch last on characters like Chirrut Imwe, is that right? Because I personally felt like it was a really clever idea to include him in Rogue One, because it goes to show or develop the Force outside of the realm of characters who are special and chosen one type heroes. You get to do everything and fight the evil. Your average person might also have a spiritual relationship with the Force, and it goes back to George Lucas's original intention of the Force being a mystical, nebulous force that you can't predict. He described it initially as being all religions sort of forced into one, I'm leaving. But you get, well, actually that kind of goes back to also our discussion about ego with him, his frustration with the new Star Wars movies, despite them being so successful and resonating with people for the same reason the originals did. But you get this kind of return to the original feeling of how the Force was, where it's not something you can predict, but it's something you can reach into within yourself and rely upon.
Yeah, and like this comes back down to this is always reinforced with the design of this character. He's not a digital character per se, but like he's dressed very much like a Shaolin monk or something. He has very simple robes. He uses a staff. He even does a chant when he really needs to channel with the Force. I'm one with the Force is with me. I'm one with the Force is with me. It's a very meditative sort of connection. Again, and it's reinforced consistently with his character. He speaks predictably to people, and he he doesn't speak down at them, but he has a certain air about him that says like this person is in touch with his spirituality, and through that spirituality, he's in touch with the Force.
Yeah, by recalling on visual cues like of monks and I guess Buddhist theming, they're invoking in your mind like the idea of pre-existing religions and expanding on their own universe by inspiring you to think about different ways that they might interpret the Force in different cultures, galaxy.
In the novelization, he's actually described as only ever saying things when he feels like his words are necessary to shift the situation. He only speaks things of importance when he feels like they're going to change the outcome in some way. Like Bayes regards that whenever he talks as usually something that's important about that, or just that bad.
I think that's really cool because it's like you can like design the character, just to drop the word design there, like just forming characters so that you can probably, I guess that would probably come, you could probably use it as like a plot device later on, that the things you say actually mean something. That's a whole other thing I can go into, but like the way characters speak is such a cool part of characterization. But yeah, like having a character like him really lends more context to the world in a way that's pretty unique.
Good design.
It's good design. But sometimes it can just be spiritual. And honestly, in my opinion, the original trilogy skill, or like, I guess not skill, but its greatest strength is that it wasn't all that. You didn't have to count every individual detail. You didn't have to think too hard about it. It was a simple story of good triumphing over evil with a character that you could watch develop. So
moving on to everyone's favorite first-person sci-fi shooter, Donkey Nuts. Wait, no, I mean Tessa. Blam! No, hang on. It's called Halo. And then later Halo Combat Evolved, because Microsoft said, you can't call a game just Halo, you gotta put more words in there. But actually, those were all working titles for Halo. It used to be a real-time strategy game for a while, and Bungie at that point had every game that they had published, or rather, every game that they had developed began with the letter M, so they were like, I don't know, call it Monkey Nuts. And someone was like, I can't tell my mom I'm working on Monkey Nuts. I'm like, all right, it's got shooting, call it Blam. And then later they were like, oh, Halo works. And Microsoft said, Halo doesn't work. They said, Halo Combat Evolved. And that comes to the title that we all know and love today. So part of the good thing about the design of Halo is that it's a first-person shooter. It's a very fast-paced first-person shooter. And it actually, a lot of the tropes that we know today about first-person shooters really came from Halo, right? I mean, we have GoldenEye was a shooter that existed earlier, and although it technically had twin-stick shooting, if you plugged into controllers, you could use dual analog in GoldenEye, but besides the 7 people that did that, Halo Combat Evolved was one of the first games to really introduce a lot of the staples that we know today for shooters, particularly on the controller, right? Like right bumper fire, left bumper grenade was Halo. The top face button, Y or triangle, wherever to switch weapons, was Halo. Square/X to reload, also Halo. These are staples that exist into the default control schemes of games to this day.
For the record, it was just because it wasn't the default control scheme, GoldenEye actually did have that.
Yeah.
Like not the 2-controller gimmicky thing, but like using the D-pad in place of a left stick. It had like aim with the right stick, fire with where R would be, and pressing A and B, which are roughly the X and Y.
Yeah, but also the N64 controller required a lot of moving around.
I mean,
to use the multiple control schemes. Yes. Yes, GoldenEye was an important step in this journey, but like Halo Combat Evolved was like the one that really like set in stone. Like this is how it was done in the past. This is how we refined it, focused it, and really made it very smooth. And
at least for the science fiction.
Especially for the science fiction genre.
Well, and the shooter genre.
The design goes past even the controls. There's a lot of really intuitive things about the enemies in the way that Halo is set up. And the first one of these is that bigger equals better. You can tell just by looking at this that these guys here on the bottom, there's going to be a lot of them. They're kind of going to be fodder. These guys here in the middle, they're going to be, you're going to see a decent number of them, and they're going to be pretty scary. But then every so often you'll see a big guy, and that's going to be a problem. And that's exactly the structure of the way that it goes. You can walk into a fight and immediately know who is the most threatening just by the way that they exist. And this works really well for science fiction because they're all aliens, right? Like, you can't really have a human that's like different humans. I mean, I suppose they could be in different forms of power armor or whatever, but having a bunch of alien races working together and designing the difficulty of them based off of that works really well and is very intuitive. And another really good thing that Halo does that is in the science that really lends itself to science fiction is that glowing equals going to hurt you. At any given time when you're walking around, if you step into a room, anything that's glowing that is not a set light is going to hurt you. When someone shoots a fuel rod at you out of a fuel rod cannon, the gun glows, rocket glows, and I got to get out of the way. When someone comes at you with an energy sword, when you see that for the first time, first of all, it's a thing that you know is an enemy, and it's running at you. It's got a big glowy thing, and you're like, that is not friendly, and I should not let that touch me. And so you just immediately know, and the game constantly reinforces that if there's a thing that is glowing, don't let it touch you.
You told us to trust the boxes.
Okay, the boxes are lit. They're not glowing. They're between lit and glowing. So moving on a little bit more, going a little bit deeper into the character design of this enemy. This is a screenshot from one of the earlier Halo games. The graphics have kind of dated a little bit, but it actually lends itself really well to, you look at this scene, you know that these are bad guys. You can very clearly identify, okay, there's a bigger guy in the back, and there's a couple smaller guys up front, and they're different colors. And it doesn't really matter what colors these guys are a little bit. Once you get better at the game and you need your skills more, you do actually learn that the difference in colors does make a difference. But to someone who's just starting out, okay, there's 3 of these guys, there's a smaller, this guy's bigger, bad guy. Like, this guy's most threatening, and these guys are less threatening. And even this guy here, who is a red aesthetic on a red background, the fact that he's so much more detailed than the wall behind him makes him pop, makes him stand out. His reds are, even though they're dirty, they're brighter than the wall behind him. So even if you just looked at this image for a second, you can tell that there's about maybe 5 enemies or so, and I know exactly where they're standing. I know what formation they are. I don't maybe know the names of the enemies, but I know which one's the scariest, which ones are less scary.
Which Star Trek is
But it's kind of actually going back to the way hardware changes and evolves. Like earlier games, they really needed to strategize and know which things were important because they only had so much resources to allocate. So of course they're going to put the higher res textures on the characters because that's what they want you to focus on. Whereas you really don't need to care about these individual little screws. And sometimes, like as stuff gets more evolved, that can maybe be where design suffers because you have all this cool processing power in the latest game station, but you can just make everything look good. You can have 4K textures on everything, and students need to stop doing that.
Yeah, no, that's actually a major thing that people from the Master Chief Collection, when they remastered Halo Combat Evolved, I think were saying, yeah, the enemies are kind of blending into the backgrounds a little bit more than they used to. It's a little bit harder to instantly identify them because everything is so detailed. There's so much information flooding you at one given time that you can't just quite snap decisions. So I want to go into the design a little bit more of some of the individual enemies. So in the first Halo, these are the 4 major Covenant enemies that you encounter. And they are of approximately the size, except for this Hunter guy over here, because he's much bigger than this, but he already took up about a third of the slide, and that was all I was willing to give him. So you can see very easily, even people who haven't played the game, that the threat level goes approximately this guy, this guy, this guy. Like, it's just intuitive. This guy's got a big gun, this guy's got a medium-sized gun, this guy's got a shield, this guy doesn't have a gun in this picture, but they're aliens, so that you can have these weird-looking things like that. And it's really, once again, the science fiction is very led to it, and it allows you to really design creatively in something that's more grounded in reality you're sort of blocked from. And like further on top of that, each enemy has each enemy even has, like I mentioned, color schemes to them. So as you get better at the game and you're able to walk in a room and instantly identify the enemies immediately, you can then send some extra brain power in processing what color armor these guys are wearing indicates even how threatening they are amongst their subgroup. And in Halo 1, at least, the grunts who have orange, red, green, and then this purplish black. And then as they get more threatening, they have better weapons, they have slightly more health. So you can establish that threat level immediately. And just even these, like, they're really short, squat, low to the ground. They're called Ugoi. This very, like, gruntal sort of word even is very indicative for enemies called grunts. There's a lot of them at any given battle. There's at least 4, sometimes half a dozen or a dozen of them in some of the larger scale combat. And they're even in the design of, besides their visual design, their audio design. They speak in very high-pitched voices. It makes them seem a little bit more non-threatening. You can hear their commanders shouting orders to them that they follow. And if you kill their commander, they run away screaming. If you run up to one and melee him on the head, the ones around him will run around screaming, "Devil!" Like, the AI in Halo Combat Evolved was really advanced for the time, and it really helped with the immersion of what was happening. And then, like, the next tier, so to speak, or rather the next enemy that you encounter are the elites, or the Sanghili. And then they move from blue to red to gold to white. And then once again, we have the glowing equals going to hurt you metaphor going on here. The first time you encounter these guys, he's got a big glowy stick and he's running at you. And you go, okay, stay away from me, glowy stick, man. You don't need to immediately know that it's a sword. You just know that it's going to hurt you. And then later when you pick it up, you go, this is a sword. And then you have a lot of fun. But, like, so the first ones that you encounter are the blue ones. And so you go, okay, these guys are tougher than the grunts. And then you see one that's red. And you go, oh, this one's red. Also, he's taking a lot more bullets. Also, he's hurting me more. You go, oh, okay, I see. The red ones are tougher than the blue ones. You see a gold one with a sword, and yeah, I've been over that a couple of times. And then you see a white one, and you're like, okay, I've never seen one of these before in my life. I need to make sure that I take this carefully because this is probably even tougher, which they are. And furthermore, because we've already established that height is a problem, that these guys even have some fancier headdresses, which give them even more stature. The elites are approximately the same size as Master Chief. They're a little bit taller, but the fact that this one is the white elite is even significantly taller than, not significantly, but decently taller than his friends, further reinforces the fact that bigger equals better. For the auditory design, they have these deep, grovelly voices that they use to shout orders around the battlefield, and you can actually see them directing enemies. So there's a lot of ways that tell you the first time you see one, that this guy is in charge, he's the biggest threat. If I take him out first, this fight's going to be a lot easier. And it is easier to play Halo if you take these guys out first. You spend too much time worrying about the grunts, these guys are just going to bash your head in. So you can advance me. A little bit later, to mix up the gameplay from the regular just, okay, cover, shoot, move forward, cover, shoot, move forward, we have the Jackals, or the Kigyar. They're much slenderer than any of the enemies you've seen. They're not wearing very much armor to them, but the first ones you encounter have these large shields. They really, they're a little bit more cunning. They flank more than the other enemies. The snipers are set up in decent positions at any given time, and can be a real problem if you don't focus on them and take them out first. Both of these variants of the enemy really reward a slightly different form of gameplay, which is accurate. If you just start pumping bullets into an elite, you can take it down pretty easily. And if you just start spraying all over the field at the grunts, you can also take them down. But this guy's shield, you need to, aim at the little breach, or when he pokes his head up, you need to try to get it with the overpowered pistol. This guy, you need to, most of the time when you encounter a sniper, it provides you with a sniper rifle. The game does, because the game is designed well. So when you get a sniper rifle, you're like, okay, what am I going to look for? And these guys are very visually distinct from the other ones, even through the scope of a sniper, or rather, not using the scope of a sniper. You can see them, and even the first time you encounter them, it's very obvious that this is a different enemy that you're going to need to handle differently. John, on the slide?
Also, the sniper's heads glow.
Yes.
So, you can just shoot at the glowy bit and die.
Yeah, because glowy equals bad. Let me shoot it. Oh, look, glowy's gone. I am safe. So, last but not least, in Combat Evolved, we have the Hunters. Oh, we had a question? Sorry.
The glowing thing is only added in Halo 3. Does anyone here remember the Jackals in Halo 2, especially on legendary mode with sniper rifles? Good. They were poorly designed in Halo. The Jackal set was poorly designed in Halo 2, and they just are just like a end your fun. They're just there to say you're having too much fun. Now let me end this fun.
Well, they're friends.
Being a sniper.
I think you need to slow down. But so these guys you encounter them very few times in Combat Evolved, and when you do, the field is around you fighting them. Just the fact that you go up to their knee, I think. These guys are big, and there's two of them, and they have this big thing. I don't know what it does, but it's large, and they've got this huge gun that as soon as you see them, they're shooting these huge, slow-moving, glowing projectiles at you, and you're like, oh god, what do I do? And these enemies are really interesting because they're actually a puzzle in order to solve them. You can't just shoot them until they die. They have a weak point on their back. You need to get behind them in order to defeat them. But most importantly, they work together. They cover each other's backs, literally. So it's not just a matter of walk up, okay, dodge your melee attack, and you're recharging, so I'm going to run behind and get you. Because his friend is standing there ready to knock you back, literally. So you need to actually outsmart the AI in order to take these guys down. And it's immediately obvious as soon as you step into the first time that you see them that it's going to be different because there are no other enemies around. It's just these two fellas hanging out, having a good time, being chums. And it is your job to break up their game of rock, paper, scissors.
I think it's kind of interesting, actually. As you play different teams, there's always those characters that they strong in the front and you hit them in the back. And there seems to be like a consistency in the way they move, almost trope-like. He's got this massive thing in front of him, so you're not going to charge inward right into his face. And you'll see this kind of shield in the front, kind of physical, some kind of barrier in characters in every kind of game where you have to attack them from behind. So there's those kind of considerations from the character designers as to how they're going to indicate to the player what they need to do in order to take care of them.
Yeah, and it's just they're scary, and but they're like a fun scary because as soon as you figure it out, as soon as you defeat one, the other one's really easy to defeat as well because he doesn't have his friend guarding his back, and it's really well because once you solve the puzzle, it's over. Once you've beaten them, you've beaten them. You don't have to continue defeating them over and over again. Once you solve the puzzle, it's done. So just moving forward, this character design is not only indicative of how these people are going to behave, but it also reflects in the environments that they live. So right here, I have an example of the 4 major factions that you see in Halo Combat Evolved: the Covenant, humans, Flood, and then this is the only remnant we have of the Forerunners, which is this really hyper-advanced ring that has a bunch of plant life and things on the inside, and it's like, wow, that is crazy technology. So what we're going to do, actually, this is a slight interactive segment, just to make sure everyone's still awake at this point, is that the next couple of slides, there's going to be a scene, a single scene, and then you have to tell me which faction lives there. So Cassie, if you can bring us to the first one. So what do we see here? We see a lot of modern industrial sort of realistic aspects to them. You know, there's a couple of glowy shields going around, but we see a lot of rusted metal and a lot of hard lines. So what faction do we think this belongs to?
You have the obligatory sci-fi.
Well, yeah, so you know this isn't just the warehouse down the street. Okay, so Alex, who does this belong to?
Can't be humans. There's no hexagons.
Shit.
But actually, yes, this is the humans, and it's reflected not only in the design of the place, but also if you remember the design of the human on the other screen. It was very simple. He was a little bit dirty, but it looked like he could get the job done. So go ahead, hit the slide. Oh wow, human. Woo. Okay, next one. Okay, who does this belong to? There is there's a lot of smooth lines here. Here's those hexagons that you were missing before. There's a lot of these purple sort of unnatural lights going on. Does anyone want to take a guess? Okay, Alex.
It's not the aliens, but it is the aliens.
But it is the aliens. Yeah, this is the Covenant. You know, you see when you fire it, just go ahead and hit. So it says, oh wow, you got it right. So you know when you shoot the Covenant, you can see their shields are of similar color to this, and it feels like they live here. So when you go here, you're like, ah yes, this is where they live. So right, we can go to the next one. So we see another sort of industrial sort of area, but it's very clean. There's lots of diagonal lines here. There's a lot of bright lights and shiny metals, and this place looks very futuristic, even compared to the Covenant. It looks even more so. So does anyone want to take a guess who lives here? Forerunners? That's right. This is part of one of the Forerunner bases. So, and then finally, I mean, this is the easiest one, which is why I saved it for last. It's really gross, disgusting sort of it looks like it grew here. It doesn't look like this is the area that it belongs in, but it looks like it's absolutely taken it over and made it part of its own. So this is very obviously part of the Flood. So yeah, the Flood acts as a manifestation of a disease. They are destroyers of worlds, and when you start encountering them, and once their abode, once they start invading others' abodes and make it their own, it's very obvious that this did not belong to them, but now it does. And it's a great mirror of this is what the characters look like, this is what the characters do, this is what the characters behave like, this is where they live, and it reflects all of that. So, and all of that is just done via the visual design of that. And it's very important that when you're designing things, you think, what is this thing that I'm designing? What does it do? How can I reinforce that both in the way that it looks, but also in the way that it interacts with the environment?
Yeah, and just to save resources and to save the player's time, you want to be able to tell the story as soon as possible. You don't want to make them sit through cutscene after a cutscene of the invasion happening. Maybe you'll have them play through it, but if they can walk in here and be like, oh shit, I've seen Covenant ships, this isn't how it's supposed to be, that's a lot more impactful than watching us flow. So now we're going to talk about a recent film that I love very much. We're going to talk about Black Panther. And the reason I wanted to include Black Panther here is because of the depth of research they went into when designing this film.
Will there be spoilers?
Oh, has anybody not seen Black Panther? Okay, so I'm not really gonna spoil it. All I'm really gonna spoil is that there is an antagonist. His name is Killmonger. So if we can move on to the next slide. I think one thing that's really, okay, I'm not gonna read all this text to you. I put a lot more text. Okay, I think one thing that's really important to think about is who makes the media you consume, where they're coming from. So like George Lucas wanted to make a cool Star Wars space film, which is why the original Luke Skywalker looked like a cooler version of George Lucas. And then Halo, some guys want to make a cool space game. And Black Panther came from a place, I'm sure you know, deep love and respect for culture and history. So two of the people involved in the production are Ruthie Carter, who's the costume designer, she's on the left, and Hannah Beachler, who's the production designer. So what the production designer does is she does the research on the film, she figures out what kind of things do we need, what would this place look like, what kind of locations are our characters going to travel to, and how can we make that as convincing as possible. And then she hands that off. She actually wrote this enormous manual on the culture of Wakanda, the history of Wakanda. They figured out geographically where Wakanda would be, and from there on, went sourcing from cultures nearby. And then she passes that off to Ruthie Carter, who looks at, based off of, actually, we can go to the next slide, based off of what the manual says, which was supposedly like explained to the hilt, like what needs to be done. So like Beachler actually made a map of Wakanda, where the capital is, where the palace is, where the different districts are, where the different cultural groups live, because there's the different tribes of Wakanda. And they figured out that it was near Kenya, Uganda, Sudan, and they took inspiration from very specific, like the Omo Valley tribes in Ethiopia, people of Western Nigeria, so the Igbo people, in trying to figure out what kind of clothing, what kind of visual aesthetics, so like these kind of jewelry, handmade fabrics would be commonly found in the area. So when you see the people of Wakanda, you're like, okay, this feasibly makes sense that they could live in this area. So there were a lot of, as you can see, like consistencies between the Maasai people who actually exist and the Dora Milaje, who are kind of, well, you'll see them in the movie when you see it. They're kind of like the king's guardswomen in terms of the fabrics that feel consistent. But as Ruthie Carter talks about in an interview, the idea was, if you go on to the next slide, like how we could envision an African nation that wasn't colonized, and how we could show how Wakanda could have developed in terms of technology, culture, religion, if they had not been invaded on or imposed upon, or if their opportunities had not been taken from them. So the idea in designing for Black Panther was, how can we make a really powerful culture that feels rich and diverse, while still making it feel believable. And all of this world building and the richness of the world that they created through their research and their design is what makes T'Challa, by extension, feel like an imposing or a strong character, because he comes from this long-standing history. So an interesting thing about the film, actually, and the costume design, is that the color coding is very specific. So without spoiling, T'Challa, Nakia, and I forgot your name, Okoye, as representatives of Wakanda and their government, they're all color coded by the colors of the United African flag. So you have the black for the royal family of the Black Panther cult. You have the green for the, and you have the red for the Dora Milaje.
I think Nikita was like strategic for the
Yeah, the river tribe.
reconnaissance.
That was it.
Yeah.
He's sort of like the spy for the river tribe, I think. And then his sister, by extension, is black and purple, and his uncle is bright purple. Whereas characters like M'Baku and Eric Stevens are Killmonger. Look, as his name is presented in the movie, and he has, I forgot his real name, but it doesn't matter because we're going spoiler free, where almost a police blue, because of their roles as imposing malicious characters. Yes.
So interesting about Killmonger is at least this outfit that he wears. So Michael B. Jordan, which is the actor that plays him, is actually a massive Dragon Ball Z fan, and he designed that particular outfit after Vegeta's armor. So which is like Vegeta from like the original saga, where it's like he has the chest armor that goes to the chest and is the blue undersuit. So that's like what he got it from, essentially. So like, and Vegeta is a very imposing character, so it works.
Like, hey, Ruth, I want to be Vegeta. Can you do that for me? I was like, okay, I guess so.
But yeah, and
Your
like,
time to shine.
even on again on the sound design of this, where it tells a lot about the characters without having to dive into text and backstories, is that Black Panther's main theme it's a little bit more tribal. It's got the very heavy. It feels like it's from this Native African sort of Wakanda thing, where Killmonger's theme is a lot more like hip hop sort of thing. It feels like African American culture in America, which is where they're both from. And although you know that from the movie and watching it, it's constantly reinforced and it keeps it forward in your mind. And it's about like the symmetry and reinforcing what you've said in all aspects of
Without spoiling the movie, it goes to show that the differences between their characters and how their respective cultures are still important to them, and showing that as they conflict, how they can overlap and how they clash. And there's a lot of subtle ways that they do that in the film, which is what I think makes it so rich. Next slide, please. Another thing to consider is just how advanced Wakanda is as a country. So there were a lot of cool things they got to explore. For example, if they sit on a huge mountain of vibranium, what are all the things they can use it for? So it's in their weapons, it's in their clothing, it's in their city planning. They actually have like magnetic strips along their street, so their magnetic cars will drive over it and the dust kicks up. Wakabi's cloak. Oh no, I called him Wakabi. That's the guy from the Jabari tribe. Whatever. He's not in the slide, but he's still pretty cool. And that's actually something else to consider. But I'll talk about that in a minute. Wakabi's cloak is similar to the traditional clothing worn in Lesotho, but it's lined with vibranium, so we can actually use it as a shield. So what they do is they take pre-existing cultures that would be that exist in countries around where Wakanda would be, and think about how they can upscale them with the use of Wakandan technology. In the same way, when we think about what's futuristic, it's kind of cool to see what our modern ideas of futurism are. So this almost feels like our sort of idea of the 70s futurism, in my opinion, and I'll explain that. In that they decided to use 3D printing a lot in this movie. So Queen Ramonda, who's played by Angela Bassett, her headdress is similar to the married headdress of a Zulu woman, but it's entirely 3D printed, and so is her mantle. But it'll be kind of interesting to look back on this in 40 years and be like, wow, that was some really shitty printing. And Cassie loves 3D printing, so she'll be the first person. Yeah. She'll be like, that's a really blocky print. I could have done that a lot better. We don't know. Like, I think it's one of those things that are super new to us. And you'll see these in like older movies where it's like the cool new technology, but it's actually something we don't use. So it'll be kind of interesting to look back on that. But another thing that's interesting to consider in terms of technology is, I don't have a picture of this, but I just thought of it, is you have the use of vibranium in the capital, and then you have the Jabari tribe, which actively rejected the use of vibranium. So you get to see through the movie the cultural technology in the capital and the surrounding tribes, and then when you see the Jabari characters, you're like, okay, they have more wooden armor, or they wear more furs, and you see just visually how they are from the same area, but not exactly the same.
It's interesting because the Jabari tribe is completely unaware that the wood that they use is actually used with vibranium because it seeps into the ground.
Oh.
So it actually makes the wood that they use much stronger, which is why the Jabari Chief's stick is so lethal when hitting the jump.
That's cool.
It's
Shit.
fun. Because comics has to be.
I didn't know about that. So yeah, it's really cool. The same thing with like their underground like labs and stuff and their advanced medicine is just like what could have been created in this area had it not been for colonization and disruptive cultures of the slave trade. So next slide. So at the end of it all, I think there's a really great quote from Hannah Beechler, which is kind of sums up how I feel about this presentation, is that good design tells stories unapologetically. This more is specifically about Black Panther, and that they told the stories they want to tell, and change people's minds, lift people up through this work, and still bring edge of fun and humor and sadness and thoughtful too. And I think the thing that makes it so successful, going back to what we spoke about design in the beginning, is that it comes from a place of honesty, but also comes from a place of truth. And the fact that Black Panther had this enormous cultural grounding and dedication to telling a story about serious issues, and our history as a nation in America, as well as the history of Africa, is what makes it so effective.
Yeah, and just in conclusion, I think the most important word of this quote is thoughtfulness, right? Like when you're designing something, sound design, visual design, level design, anything, you need to think, why am I doing it? Is it just because it's cool, or is there a reason either to the player, to the viewer, to the world I'm establishing, to the character that I'm establishing? It's so much more meaningful, and your audience, some of your audience might not notice it, but those that do will really, really appreciate it. And even if they don't actively notice it, passively, it'll make the world feel more alive.
It's just, we can criticize Star Wars, we can criticize Halo or Black Panther or whatever, but the fact that we're even here talking about these franchises and it's, I guess, franchises is what goes to show that so much love, time, and effort went into the design of them, which I think is how we can show that they're pretty great. So I think that's okay. So
I put this slide in because
I appreciate it.
Because
so,
we want to support our friends here. STARITGraph came in and did a not insignificant part of this presentation, and there was a lot of back and forth and thought between our two clubs, and they have a lot of cool stuff that I want to make sure you guys don't miss out on. So if you want to plug yourself, please do.
Sure. As you may know, STARITGraph teaches 3D graphics. We are 3D graphics students mostly who see gaps in our own curriculum and want to fill them and reach out to not only students in our own program, but students from other majors who maybe don't have the time to take classes in 3D graphics software and techniques and design principles. So we teach just, again, workshops in software like Maya, Unity, Blender. We should do one in Unreal Engine. We could do one. Hexagons. Unreal Engine comes with a prefab hexagon shader, and it has lights in it, and it's cool, and it looks like sci-fi, and you can make everything super shiny and reflective, and it's super cool and easy to do, and it has a really cool node-based system that someone in our club could totally teach you. Substance Paint, which is a texturing software. ZBrush is for 3D sculpting. You can sculpt on your computer. I don't know if there's any other we've done.
We also have, in addition to workshops, we do like events, networking, animation festivals, games.
Yeah, we have our monthly critique. So if you're ever working on something, you're writing maybe you're writing. Honestly, you could come in and read your story to us, whatever. If you draw a picture in your
when do you guys meet?
We meet at Fridays at 4 p.m. in booth 8450. So,
what if I'm a
Lab.
beginner who's interested? What meeting should I attend?
Any of them. You can email us at ritgraph@gmail. We can add you to our mailing list. We will welcome you in with open arms. We love everyone.
Specifically, if you're looking to join this Friday at the Walk, Friday night around 7, a bunch of us are going to get dinner. So if you want to meet people, say hi, ask what we're doing.
This meeting, we're doing a rough meeting on photogrammetry. you don't know what that is, we're gonna make something with our hands, and then what you do is you take photos of it from a bazillion different angles, and you can make that, you take that data, you give it to a program that will make it into a 3D model for you. That's cool as hell. And then you can keep that model forever in memory of your wonderful time in art.
Show it to your grandparents.
I think
Show it to your grandparents. They'll be like, "What the hell? How did you put that in the computer?" You're like, black magic.
I've heard a company that does that. I think they call it Capture Dimensions. They make like models based off you can make a model of yourself. If you want, you pay for it.
It's cheaper.
True, but
after that, we're gonna have like a casting plugging your club. But after that meeting, we're just gonna go to the walk. We're gonna fundraise, and then we're just gonna hang out and have a family dinner if you want to get to know cool 3D enthusiasts. That's our look. So, on that note, does anyone have any thoughts, either on anything we've spoken today or any theories or stories you think are really cool in terms of design? I'm strong.
I think Futurama leads a lot to its design because it's very much, and I think, and it's similar vein to the Fallout series as well. They're both 50s, they're both like 50s style, but the future. So it's like Futurama is like their ship, the Planet Express delivery ship is very much a classical rocket ship that you may see in like a 1960s cartoon, but it's like one of the main settings of the entire show. So it's like
it's kind of like an iconic ship. Like if you've seen the show, you could probably see the ship and you'd be like, I know that one. I watched that. And I think it's something that people actually underestimate is just comedy series or like non-serious fiction. The design work that goes into Futurama is still as much that goes into a film because they're always trying to make something new and memorable for every episode. Same thing with Fallout. Oh god, they went way in depth with that in terms of writing out the whole history of the world and trying to figure out how to evoke that. I remember playing Fallout 4. See, now I'm just ranting. If anybody wants to have a point, they want to chime in. But in Fallout 4, I remember going into a museum and you see this mural of all these events that happen. But they don't tell you outright. I'm sure you could have read them in one of the previous games. B, if they leave a memo reading line around for you to read. But it gives you the impression while you're walking around that the world is so rich. And you as an explorer having woken up, there's only so much you can possibly know. And it's careful decisions in terms of the writing and the terms of the experience they craft for you that really gets that feeling of being out of your depth across really. That's my rant.
All this talk of design, it reminds me of in this anime that I'll be giving a talk about at the TourCon.
Nice.
Design is really huge. The art style isn't glamorous exactly, but it's really appropriate to the ultraviolet horror angle that it's trying to evoke. And I especially love the way that my favorite character looks. He's a villain he's the leader part of the villain ensemble, and he's kind of a satanic figure. And you can just tell just by looking at him. He's this really tall guy. He's got long crimson red hair and this robe it's like navy blue with a flame pattern. He wears this bead necklace with a skull pendant. And he carries a red and white electric guitar that doubles as a machine gun.
God.
So you can tell just by looking at him, and he's like bad news.
He's evil with a pink symbol. Evil. He's like, okay, that guy's evil. I should avoid him.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's actually a thing that's really fun about anime. What specific show is it? Deadman. All right, I kind of know. I've read part of Deadman. Part of the thing, okay. I can't rant much about Deadman, but I think a thing that in general, it's like, if I remember, it's like a prison, but it's also like almost like a Hunger Games thing, but it's entertainment. So they come to the prison and they watch them fight each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I agree.
And there's something that's really kind of cool and interesting about anime. It's just, it's not going to be realistic. So we can gripe about when women have her titties out, and that's a whole thing. Am I allowed to have word in my
You're allowed one permission, so.
I just said it twice.
Oh no! We got
But
shut
like,
down.
you can, I mean, for all criticism of making anime, there's so much opportunity to be weird with it. Like, I just watched Kakaguri, which is the one about these kids that like gamble in high school, and it gets weird as hell.
It's all about like children like maybe like they're all
Really rich
they're all like
kids.
insane in different ways.
Exactly.
It's not a person that makes sure it's all about overly kind of ways.
It's like bizarre. But it's just like you could take the most ordinary situations and then escalate them to wild. Like something like Dead Man Wonderland. You're like, oh my god, like prisons are terrible. What if we made them infinitely worse? And like, and just like the visuals and like the way characters can look in a universe like that, there's a lot less, I guess, questioning. So like the same thing with Star Wars is like you don't care how the Force works. You're just like, whatever, it's cool.
That's not how the Force
If
works.
it were like a hard sci-fi, you'd be like, I need to know how that spaceship works, and I need to know how that got off the
I need to the
ground.
five physical unjusted metal that don't make any sense.
So, well, actually, the interesting thing about Star Wars is that there is a definite speed at which all the ships go at, and that's plot speed. So, they get exactly where they need to go to be relevant to the plot, and that's consistent.
Like, on top of anime, what you don't show. I just realized we have these. Like how
put it on the screen so everyone can see it. Put it on the screen.
How anime.
Wow.
How anime can
That's
influence.
wild.
How the anime style has influenced like actual filmmakers. Where you can see at the poster of like, if you had no idea what Pacific Rim was, you think like, oh, is that some weird anime movie coming out? Like, but no,
Yeah.
it's.
Oh man. All right, now we're talking about the design of the Pacific Rim. Noah, start me going.
Pacific Rim does a really good job of showing the size of the things it makes. Like, even though it's pretty much all CGI, like you can feel how big the things are just by the way the camera moves and the way they move.
Yeah, so like, you know, you walk into the Shatterdome for the first time and you see the Hong Kong twins playing basketball at the base of Crimson Typhoon, and it's like they're not even like the size of the bottom of his foot, right? Like it's the Jaeger spent a lot of time in the early shots in the background, right? So it's just kind of it exists as a set piece. It's almost part of the wall, and then you kind of have a moment where you're like, that's a foot, or like very early on in the movie where it shows like, oh, they get inside this massive pod, and you're like, oh, okay, and then that's its head, and it drops down at like, you know, crazy fast and screws into the Jaeger, and then like also just even the way they move in the cockpit, it's very slow, deliberate. That makes even the pilots feel very heavy. So then when the camera zooms out and you see the Jaeger making the same movements, it's like this is a heavy thing, right? When they move, the ground shakes. You know, they always announce their presence with these huge blaring air horns. It just things feel heavy. When a punch connects, it's like it connects. You can feel it, and it just feels good.
Yes.
There was a point, Toro made a point for designing Jaegers to make sure they were never designed based on any like actual mechanism. That was just understood. Always going to be like based on its own. So the same thing applies to Kaiju, right? So like designers had to perfectly make sure they didn't reference any other mechanisms from other like series things. So that's why all like Jaegers like they're based off actual like vehicles of that country.
Yeah.
Or like Kaiju like sea fish.
Yeah, and
it's also what some of the issues of like the second movie that it doesn't have any of the same kind of narrative direction.
So like, yeah, I mean, just like in the design of each individual like Jaeger to them, like, you know, the first two that really come to mind to me are Gypsy Danger, which has red, white, and blue paint job on it, and Crimson Typhoon, which is from Hong Kong, and it's just very red. It's named Crimson Typhoon, and you know the Hong Kong flag is very red with the yellow flower in the middle. Yeah.
The other thing about Pacific Rim is each Jaeger feels really, really unique, like not just in terms of how it looks, but also how it fights. So and how it looks tells you how it's going to play.
Well, they even
Alpha is really bulky and it's really slow, but it punches.
They even have on like the website, they even have a listed fighting style for each Jaeger. Like Gypsy Danger is a brawler, and like Striker Eureka is like a dirty boxer.
Yeah.
Cherno Alpha is like a classical like wrestler almost.
Yeah, no, they have in the art book, it has like a collection of Mark I Jaegers, and it's like statted them as if they were like characters in a fighting game. It's like speed.
Oh yeah, no, they all have stats as well, even the new ones.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but the first ones because they weren't like in the movie. It was just these are some other Jaegers that just exist, and this is how they like compared to all of the other ones, and it's just.
So one of the things you brought up was like how the Jaegers like move, and this is kind of going off the grid, so I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll allow it.
But like in contrast to this, another mecha anime that I think really does a good job of contrasting that is Evangelion, where I think one of its strongest things is how differently like the mechs are from other mechas. Where like other mechas are like they're very hard, they're very well defined, but the mechas in Evangelion are very organic. They're like there's not much that's separating them from the monsters that they're trying to fight. Like they're long boys and they run like people.
Yeah, they
and
like
it's super weird.
Like this. This is how people run.
No, no, that's how Naruto
they,
runs.
they run like normal people, but like I brought this up in last week, but like a main trait about an Evangelion is that it can just like break into a dead sprint. Like you just see it like just running like a sprinter would at the Olympics. That's like hauling like ass through Tokyo 14 at this point.
And they aren't even quite proportioned. They're proportioned almost like people. Their proportions are just off enough that they look weird.
But that works, I think, in Evangelion because of the weird psychological themes it taps into. It's just like see the characters going through these tough psychological issues. You kind of see how these mechs they fight are almost like people, but not. I think that sort of uncanny valley works for just how uncomfortable poor Shinji is at all times. It just kind of it makes sense that these things that he should be trusting are also slightly uncomfortable to look at. Not in a good way, ever.
And they bleed.
Yeah, that's what's freaky.
Because they're like detective type ones.
That's what's freaky.
Yeah,
like
that's the first thing.
I mean,
yeah, they're
spoilers you want to get.
So let's
tone down.
Does anyone else have any good science fiction design they want to rant about for a little bit? Talk about how just freaking cool it is.
I mean, I don't think that makes sense, but I really appreciate the design portal and the Outlook universe.
Yeah.
Really, portal.
Well, I do want to rant just a little bit about like the difference between Portal 1 and Portal 2 because they take place at different time frames of the Aperture Science Laboratory, and Portal 1 is just super like the word hard comes to mind. It's got a lot of hard angles. It's got a lot of harsh lights. It feels sterile. And then in Portal 2, where it's more organic, a lot of things are broken. There's a lot of greens in the environment that you see a lot. It's got a lot of, it feels more shattered to it.
I would even go beyond that because, so like, Portal 1, like, from a meta perspective, it shares a lot more textures with Half-Life because they had like no budget. But like in universe that works because it's like supposed to take place not too far up away from where Half-Life 2 is in the timeline. Whereas like Portal 2 is far in the future, where like by that point, like almost anyone who is still alive somewhere, any human who's still alive somewhere in Aperture Science is dead, and it's just this like science facility that was designed to just automatically do more science done like out of control. So there is no thought about like maintaining anything, which is why everything from like Portal 1 is overgrown. But like as you like go to other parts of the facility, they're just like, we don't care about what happens to the old stuff. We're just gonna keep building stuff. It doesn't matter if we build it just to chuck it in an incinerator, because we're gonna keep producing because that's what we do here. And so,
they also have like giant vats of neurotoxins.
Yeah.
For science, they have giant vats of so many things. For science.
I mean,
but like they did just that it works well for like as a cool world to be in, and it gives them excuses to like mix and match different test elements, but also works well. It resonates with the narrative of like this constantly producing brand new test chambers as the old ones are right next to them getting destroyed to make way for the new things. So we always need to be making new stuff, even though no human has actually like carry what's being produced in about a century.
Because no one said not testing.
Alex, I can talk a lot about the design of Stargate and how a lot of the alien worlds they end up on are usually modeled after different periods of time in human history, because as per the authors, what they believe in is that wherever humanity is, humanity will end up developing more or less the same technology as how we think. So we'll end up with a similar architecture. Like the Genai and Stargate Memphis are very post-industrialist society. A lot of their costumes are very green, armored military green, because they've grown up to be a military group that lives underground in fear of the Ray, which are their architecture, their ships, and their bases is a lot more organic, kind of like the Flood. And then you have the very interesting Stargate SG-1, where they blended a lot of ancient artifacts and ancient ruins designs into technology, from the Stargates to advancing ships to the pyramid ships that the global used to carry around their troops and their gliders, to the point where there is very much glyphs inscribed on the walls, hieroglyphs inscribed on the walls of the ships, and also you've got the much more interesting Nordic mythology brought in of Thor and all of the Asgardian gods just being tiny aliens that are great.
Well,
yeah.
I was gonna honestly, when you mentioned Stargate, because there's something I think that's a really cool choice that they made. Because there's something, at least look, I've seen like 2 episodes starting, so that's a little bit I know. But like, there's something really cool I think about ancient civilizations. So trying to book like ancient civilizations, like sci-fi especially, or like just mythology, is always really interesting to me personally. Because it's like you don't know what it was like to live in a society because it's so far away. So they could very well be alien. They could look. That's from a discussion I was having with someone about like in this valley theme. Anyway, unrelated. Go.
This is another topic. Another topic of like design. This is more so like game design. Doom.
Yeah.
Where Doom has like the kind of same with Halo, or I guess Halo probably got this from Doom. Where like you have like the small enemies like the imps, like you just run up and you just punch in the face. They're not challenging. But then I think advance more of the game, you get the Barons of Hell, which is giant hulking goat demons that's just like, oh, you're gonna punch me, I'm gonna punch you through 14 walls because I'm a giant monster. You have to shoot me until I die. That's what the game actually tells you to do. Shoot it until it dies.
Yeah.
But like it's like this is even more so like in the new Doom that came out 2 years ago, where like the game starts you off going like, you are the Doom Marine. You're all powerful. You can run through all these enemies no problem. Then like you get advanced boards for the game. The game's like, well then, I'm gonna throw like 50 enemies at you. You got to go through this level methodically because you got to challenge. You have to challenge yourself to get through this level. So
yeah.
like,
no, I actually at GDC I saw a really good talk by one of the head designers for Doom, and it was how they encourage what they call push forward combat, and how it was like they were like the genre for shooters has gotten stale, which is go to cover, shoot the guys, go to cover, shoot the guys, go to cover, shoot the guys, and they're like, how do we make a game so that just like the first two, where you need to be moving all the time, and they're like dodging projectiles is fun, and that's not there anymore because projectiles are just bullets. So let's have them throwing fireballs at you, and and actually the enemies will miss more the faster you move. So actually standing still, even if you're behind cover, you're going to get hit more than if you're running around out in the open. And it's like, yeah, we have enemies that purposely avoid cover and run out into open areas. So you go, I gotcha, and you want to run over and punch them in the face. And it makes killing them by melee super satisfying. And it's like, keep moving, keep moving. The entire design of the levels, the enemies, the AI, everything is keep moving, keep moving.
They even added a game mechanic called the glory kills, where like you damage an enemy enough to start glowing. So you run up and melee them to get health and ammo back. So it's like
something smart out and then like shoving it into his mouth is really boring.
Yeah, and they were even talking about how in the I don't even know what aspect of design to call this, but when you hit enemies, the way that they react to being hit, it provides a lot of information to the player really quickly. There was something like a twitch, a stagger, a stumble, and a fall. Where it was like a twitch is basically it doesn't really like they just kind of like twitch, and it might interrupt an attack that they're charging, but it's not going to really impact what they're currently in the middle of doing. You know, they'll just start charging up the attack again. But if it's just a quick attack, it's not going to interrupt that animation or whatever. Stumble, which does interrupt the animation of whatever they're doing, and it puts them in a state where they can't do anything for a little bit. And then like a fall, which is you're ready to go in for the glory kill. And it talks about how they make each of those super obvious, and how to communicate to a player that is constantly moving and jumping around like the way they want them to, still relay that information the way it needs to relay. Yeah.
So this is something we probably haven't talked about in Star for a while, but the one thing that I think does a really good job of like conveying both function and I guess sort of way of life is the alien designs in Ben 10, where at least especially in especially in the first in the original series places more of an emphasis on the function of the aliens. Like you see a dude that looks like a fish, he swims. See a dude that's on fire, he shoots fire.
Whoa.
You see a dude that looks like a circuit, he can be a technology thing.
What about the big strong guy with 4 arms? What does he do really well?
He beats things up.
Wow!
What about the really small guy?
He's really small. That's it.
He's really smart too.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one time he used to make
It's like
Gillians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like as the story goes on and they start to develop the universe more, the aliens that he starts to get tend to convey like what their culture is like more. Like I think I'm trying to think of an example of that.
I think the best one is Ghost Freak.
Oh yeah, Ghost Freak. He's like the spooky ghost, and then which is the one that gets his own mind and turns evil? The spooky ghost.
Do you remember when Ben was pregnant?
What?
Yeah, I'm not. Like,
Please elaborate.
So there was one episode where he like shifted into like I think it was during the second season where he's like older, whatever, older teenager. Then he like transforms into like the moth one, and he doesn't transform back for whatever reason, or like he does, but then he starts like eating a lot. It turns out for some reason this species that he turns into produces asexually, so he becomes pregnant, and then he, at the end of the episode, transforms back to eats really weird things like pure metal or whatever, like in his human form. He's like, I'm fine, I just really need to eat it. And at the end, he gives birth to a bunch of eggs, and then they hatch, and they're the alien.
Okay.
Whoa.
Well,
This is an episode I remember.
So Ben 10 got very weird very quickly.
I do think it's interesting how like when it started, it was just like this kid can turn into aliens, and that's pretty awesome.
Into 10 aliens.
Yeah, but then it becomes like these actual aliens from like other places. There are more of them, and I think they play off of that in a really cool way. I watched it for like after it got bad, but you know.
Isn't it a point where
apparently
it turned to over 1 million at one point?
You're thinking of Ben 10,000.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, eventually there's like, I know at one point they get to, he gets like, I think it's Alien X. That's like, he looks like space, and he's also basically God.
No, like
he literally recreates the universe from scratch.
I thought the alien can only be God where his two consciences have to agree on something, and they hate each other. Yeah.
But
Ben's part of it, but like the two alien consciousness have to agree on to do anything, and they hate each other, so they can't create anything.
But I do know that they did agree with each other for long enough to recreate the universe from scratch.
That's the one thing they did.
And apparently that's not even the most powerful one in there.
I've never seen the show.
It is a time.
God.
It is a time.
I think didn't they just reboot it like last year?
Yeah, I think
I thought it was weird the second that he like got an 11th alien. I was like Ben 10, And it was like doing the
no.
it was doing the intro where it shows all 10 aliens, and it was like it would be like 1 and then an alien and 2 and then an alien, and I got to 11, and then like it was like 11 and then like the cannonball one, and it was like 10. I'm like, but there was not okay.
But there's Kevin 11.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Ben's also an alien, but he doesn't have the powers because
What?
What?
Well,
Wait,
humans are just aliens from.
well, I mean, no.
Humans are aliens or other
Yeah,
aliens?
What?
His grandma. You know how his sister develops magic powers?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah. What?
No.
It's very cool.
Yeah, you're right.
I watched a lot of it.
The Lord.
This is a kid's show on Cartoon Network.
So his granddad is, the guy who drove the RV.
Yeah.
He had like an affair with an alien, like black, Men in Black style, and so he raises the daughter, but I'm sorry.
Wait, oh no, he's the grandpa.
But their mother doesn't develop any powers because she's never in a situation where she needs them. But then Gwen does, and then she gets magic, and she thinks, oh, I'm a magician now, but she's actually just an alien. And Ben doesn't have this power because it's only for the ladies.
I do
It's
remember
okay.
She got powers. It was like awesome.
Yeah.
Like finally.
I didn't realize this, but
I think I stopped watching this show too early.
You see, I have a little brother who watched a lot of it, so I also watched a lot of it.
The teenager show, like Gwen, like actually just knows how to use magic, and she just does it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Oh.
Who knows?
It doesn't matter. Magic still works, I guess.
Space magic. Okay, does anyone else have any other cool sci-fi design elements?
So I was about Star Trek the original series.
Okay.
How they had no budget, so most of the aliens were just people painted different colors. So when you saw some or a glowing energy order. So when you saw someone painted a certain color, you instantly knew what kind of alien they were. And like it didn't look great, but considering they had no budget, it's a pretty efficient way to do that.
I think that was kind of cool though, and it worked for the show. If it was like I feel like the original series was just about like different conflicts that people can come into, and so because it felt like it was just like addressing different parts of human nature and just portraying those aliens. So it almost felt like it worked within the looks like.
Yeah, so one of the great ones is when their transporter like malfunctions or something, and basically Captain Kirk gets split up into like 2 Kirks. One of them's like really angry and pissed off all the time, and the other one's like really demure. And the way that the episode starts is like, oh, we gotta get the bad Kirk. But it turns out that like the other Kirk is not doing a great job being a captain either. Yeah, so it was it showed that like in order to be an effective leader, like you need both halves of it, right? You can't be pissed off and angry all the time, but you can't just let people step all over you. Sometimes, both aspects of it are necessary. And it was a cool, it was one of the earlier episodes too, so it was a cool way to sort of really dive into the character in a really interesting way.
Also, the show, when they went to the beard first to show Spock is evil, they just gave him a beard. That was great.
Where's the good camera?
Character design.
Or even Futurama parodies with Flexo, where he's the one with like the magnetic goatee on him. But it turns out Bender's actually the one who won.
I mean, I think it's not really designing; it's more just a world building thing.
Okay,
So that counts.
yeah, world
That
design.
counts.
Just with Star Trek, that one thing I was coming to mind as far as like going, okay, what would this culture be like? It's so friendly because initially it was just like, what if they had like really big heads and really big ears? And I was like, well, I guess they would have a culture that values big ears, which seems like really strange in like human culture, but for them, it's all about them loads.
It makes them upset whenever they say loads because of the way they say it.
All right, we got about 5 more minutes. We have time for maybe one more, or we can just close it out here. Sure, Zachary.
Another thing, which is I am a fan of when Metroid is really good at American presidents.
Give us some examples.
Okay, so like the one I have most opinions on because it was the most recently relevant is Metroid 2, which in case people don't know, the plot is basically. So there are these things called Metroids that the game's named after, and they basically will like attach to the head of any living thing and suck out its life energy until it crumbles as a dead body. And so the Galactic Federation was like, these things are dangerous, and we can't risk like space pirates turning them into a bioweapon. So they send Samus, the player character, to go to their home planet SR388 and eradicate all the Metroids on the planet. And they did a good job, I thought, of using the limitations of the Game Boy, which is the platform it's on, which wasn't able to do quite as much as the NES game was on. They use that to their advantage. It was on a small screen, which let them, like, they could have made Samus really tiny, like Mario World, but instead, like, they let her be detailed, but then look at the environment accordingly, so it feels like really claustrophobic. So that even if you're in a large cavern, like, I guess it's kind of like with remakes of it, of which there are now 2 major ones. It's kind of like the issue, some of the issues that came up with the remake of Halo Combat Evolved, where like they have these, you know, like more detail and they brighter lights to show off the new detailed textures, but suddenly you lost the atmosphere of these like dim areas with low detail. It's a similar thing there where like you could like today, you know, you can have it on your 4K screen and see everything, but having it be on the Game Boy screen made it feel like you actually feel in it. You can be in a huge cave, but if you can only see a few steps in front of you, it can still feel really claustrophobic. And even like, again, partially the limitations of the Game Boy, they had sort of minimalist music where like when you initially start off, you got this like really triumphant, like, yeah, I'm going to the planet, I'm going to show those Metroid is what I'm made of. And then like as you venture like more off the teaching path where it's been a long time since anyone else has been there, the music sort of like starts falling apart, and which makes it it increases the emphasis on the sounds of like your blaster and your footsteps, like making it feel more like you're the intruder, like, you know, no humans or anything humanoid been here in a while, you're intruding on a space that now belongs to other creatures. And then there's also like foreshadowing of things that I appreciate how like as you kill the Metroid, there is shaking like tremors that mechanically they cause like crack filters that cause proof of acid to receive you can venture deeper into the planet. Story-wise, it implies that there are more larger beings down below that can sense that you're killing the Metroid, so that when you encounter the later stages of Metroids that are larger and more deadly, it's kind of into that before. And as you fight them, you also start noticing, like, again, mechanically, the game is throwing less of the early enemies at you, but story-wise, there aren't any of those like tiny early enemies that are just to let you get used to firing your weapon, because the Metroids are the dominant predator down here and nothing else can survive. And it just it all comes together to tell really to tell you more about what happened on a system where they couldn't just have like Game Boy can't play you can't cutscenes, so they had to tell it through the world. And also by juxtaposing Samus' mission to effectively commit genocide with showing these creatures that have already, like, as you get into the areas that have more and more Metroids, showing how they've wiped out all other life in those areas, like, it's a good way to get the player to think about, like, okay, you're doing this because at the beginning of the game it told you that this was your mission, but, like, have you actually thought about that you're basically committing genocide?
On that note, thank you to STARITGraph for helping put on this wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Definitely go to their meeting, which is
Friday at 4 p.m. in booth 8450. So basically just go to the basement. There's a sign that says 3D World.
All right, so I want to hand it over to John for those closing announcements.
Thank you.
All right, let's give our friends at STARITGraph another hand. All right, quick closing announcements. If you're postering, pick up posters. You're going to be hanging one full set of each, except for the How to Club poster, which you're only going to be hanging in priority locations. We'll talk about that when you pick them up. Don't forget to buy your membership, and anyone that is interested in night crew, talk to a bridge crew member. Ava, Tulio, me, Claire, Cameron, any one of us. Just talk to us.
Join us.
Join us.
Yeah. So that's gonna be that. See you guys next week. Woo!